Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Oddly Specific. I'm your host, Meredith Lynch, and I have fan favorite in the house, Kiki Monique, aka the Talk of Shame. She is the influential content creator and media personality that you know and love. She's got over 400K in followers on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. If you're not following her YouTube, make sure you go over and follow that. She is known as the CEO of Deep Dives, and she's built a reputation for her unorthodox yet genuine and relatable takes on pop culture, true crime, and trending topics. Kiki first gained widespread attention in her viral coverage of the Johnny Depp vs. Amber Heard trial, which was featured on Jezebel. Her sharp insights have been tapped by major outlets, including ABC News, where she contributed to segments and documentaries on the Tom Girardi case and Bravo TV's Vanderpump Rules Scandival. Most recently, TMZ enlisted Kiki to break down the Sean Diddy Combs scandal in their latest documentary of his indictment. Kiki's presence is everywhere. She's basically bi-coastal these days, from red carpets to one-on-one interviews with some of Hollywood's most intriguing figures, including Juliette Lewis, Christina Ricci, Elijah Wood, Andy Cohen, and Harvey Levin. She also sat down with reality stars and public figures like Rachel Yucatel. We love Rachel here at the pod, offering her trademark candid commentary. Her work has earned her features in Variety, People, Daily Mail, and Page Six. Currently, Kiki hosts Reality Checked on SiriusXM's Radio Andy, a live weekly call-in show where listeners engage in her pop culture expertise in real time. Kiki, welcome back to the podcast.
I love being here.
We love having you.
I mean, thank you.
And you are booked and busy these days.
I mean, I try to be. I mean, it is a goal of mine to remain constantly booked and busy because, that's how I pay the bills.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? And so I texted you and I said, hey, listen, there's a lot going on with Menendez right now, and we gotta break it down. Could you come on the pod? And you were so kind to say yes. So thanks for hopping on. I first want to ask you, growing up, what was your understanding of the Menendez trial?
I feel like I didn't know anything other than two brothers killed their parents, and that is all I knew. I don't even think I had any understanding of why they did it other than two bratty rich kids from Beverly Hills who wanted to spend their parents' money. I mean, I feel like that's what was in my head.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't really know. I think I knew the last name. I feel like I knew a little bit of like sort of the late night jokes that I would overhear that I wasn't really supposed to hear of my parents. We're always watching Letterman and things like that. But like to me, when I think back on my childhood, the O.J. Simpson case is so burned in my brain, and that was happening at the same time. And I mean, I know, like I remember I was very young when that was happening, but listen, I remember the spice rack. And if you don't remember the spice rack, it's that OJ said that I believe that he cut his hand cleaning the spice rack.
Oh, I don't even remember that part, but that's wild. But yeah, I mean, the OJ was so big. I mean, yeah, that's what is seared into our memory. And that's why it was funny even rewatching, Ryan Murphy's Monsters to see that he was locked up in the same jail at the same time. Like, I just like, it was that time.
Yeah. And so I feel like also too, you and I both grew up on the East Coast, and it wasn't, perhaps out here, it was getting more of that attention because it is a story that feels so Southern California centric as well too. It's very much the like Hollywood. There's a lot of, ties into the industry, etc. So my next question for you, because we're not going to rehash the whole crime, because I think at this point, if you're here, you know what happened. I just think it's interesting to see sort of how it has developed in the zeitgeist over the years. But I'd love to know, have you been watching the Ryan Murphy show? Did you watch this new documentary that just came out? And if so, what are your thoughts on these pieces?
Yeah, I pretty much will watch anything Ryan Murphy does. I really, so of course I was going to watch this. I didn't get a chance to watch it when it first came out. So then I was a bit influenced by all of the commentary that was happening online. And so then I felt kind of guilty, like, should I be watching this? Because, at that point, the brothers had spoken out saying that they didn't like the portrayal that Ryan had done. And so then I said, I don't know if it's responsible, but then I'm just like, also, look, Ryan Murphy has every reason to have an ego. If I was making as many shows as he was, I would too. And so when Ryan was it seemed like annoyed at the response from the Menendez, he wasn't wrong in saying, this is the most attention this case has had in years, and you should be thanking me. Now, I don't know if I would say you should be thanking me, but I get why he said it.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot of the feedback on it has been that the show is sensationalized, that it takes too many sort of liberties with the storytelling. And I do think that Ryan Murphy is not always a safe storyteller in the sense that he often sort of manipulates stories. But I think the fact of the matter is that he himself will say like, well, this is, parts of this are probably are fictionalized, or parts of this are, but it's interesting. At the same time, I'm watching the Aaron Hernandez one on Hulu, which is also a Ryan Murphy show. And I do feel like there is a little bit less of that sensationalism given to the Aaron Hernandez one. And I don't know if you're watching that one as well and what your
I
thoughts
haven't
are.
started it.
Okay, well, we'll have you back on to talk Aaron Hernandez because it is interesting. Do you have a favorite Ryan Murphy show?
I really like the very first original American Horror Story because it was just something that was so different. I'd never seen anything like that before. And so I just always think back to that first original American Horror Story.
Yeah, I feel like now that one is sort of so different than where we are with Ryan Murphy and what he creates. I really was struck by the Andrew Cunanan series because I didn't know the story of Andrew Cunanan that well, and I thought, first of all, if there's one thing we can all agree on with Ryan Murphy, he puts together a killer soundtrack. I did enjoy Scream Queens too. The first season of Scream Queens was
so good.
fantastic.
Yes.
But now we have this monsters show, and yes, the brothers have spoken out about it. And I didn't like Ryan Murphy's response, especially because one of the things he said is he was like, well, I know that Erik hasn't watched the show yet. And I was like, I mean, that's bold. I really believe there's a very good chance he has. But I don't know, maybe Ryan knows something we don't know, but I have felt that the conversations between the folks who portrayed the actors in the show have been really good. And, they have really been centering the experience of how Erik and Lyle have reacted to this. They're like, yes, of course, it's their right to feel this way. And I just wish that Ryan Murphy might take some of that as well and realize that like it's not necessarily a personal critique of him as much as it is like, hey, this story isn't being told accurately and it is our right to say that, right?
Yeah, because I felt like I read a quote somewhere where Ryan said, I have no interest in meeting the Menendez brothers. Now, I know that sometimes quotes get taken out of context, so I don't know the exact, context it was, but it's like, at one point, I'm like, really? You don't think you should be meeting the people that you're making a whole series about? Look, I get how sometimes filmmakers don't want to be influenced, and I get that process. But I will say, yeah, I'm glad that the actors themselves very much are like respectful of the material and the people behind the material and saying like, these people are alive, they're humans, they're, and I want to, they have compassion, it seems.
Yeah. And with that in mind, have you watched the documentary that came out about 2 weeks ago on Netflix that the brothers family has had a hand in? And I believe this doc is approved sort of by Erik and Lyle.
Yeah, and my understanding is they had been working on that for years. And so it's like, it was just a matter of like, oh, this happened at the same time. But yeah, of course I was like, I definitely want to watch this one because they are a part of it, and very much it's important, I think, to hear, their perspective and something they approve of for sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that reminded me of is because, we do get a taste of it in the Monsters TV show, but it really shows what an abusive person Jose Menendez was. And I think it's really important to remember how young Erik and Lyle were when this happened and the tools that you would have if you had experienced basically lifelong abuse and you're still incredibly young and you feel there is no way out. I feel I can't make a judgment on what someone should or should not do in that situation. And does that mean that I think you should kill your parents? No, I'm not saying that. And I think they know that too. But I think that they were working with the tools that they had at a time that was incredibly challenging. And I also think it was of the time. It was 1989 when this happened. One of the things that just glaringly jumped out to me in the documentary was that they were like, we could not find one person who could say one nice thing about Jose Menendez. And I was like, shit.
Yeah, that's pretty big because like if you can't even keep your mask on for a few people to think you're a good person, then like that says a lot.
Yeah, and also when you think about the fact that he's someone who like financially was so successful, like you can find people who will say things just that are like about Elon, that they're just like, "Oh my god, I love Elon," or whatever, or Trump or whatever. And I'm not telling you guys how to have an opinion on them, but these are people who like documented have done some not great stuff to people in their
Yeah.
lives, right? And so, but with Jose Menendez, it seems like he was just a horrible person through and through. And how do you cope with that? And one of the things that, they say really kicked this off was the fact that Jose had said that Erik could not go away to college. And that would make it so that abuse could continue happening to him. And he was going to have to go to UCLA, which would have been, you and I are here in LA, that would have been 10 minutes from the Menendez home. Right. So, and then when I was like, so when were the murders? I looked it up and I was like, oh, August 20th. They were out so I know that it was premeditated in the sense that they went and got the guns, but to me something about it felt more like manslaughter, and I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was like reading in because, I know with the second trial and the reason they got, life without the possibility of parole is because they were convicted with these special circumstances. And the special circumstances, I think, means, there were other, basically other circumstances that made the murders more horrible. And even, during the press conference, when they talked about, manslaughter versus murder, when they talked about the resentencing, I understand that with manslaughter, you have to be considered in imminent danger. Like
Right.
that's the difference. Whereas clearly their idea of what imminent danger isn't what the courts consider imminent danger. I guess I do understand why the manslaughter wasn't going to fly. But like I agree. It's like, you don't have the tools at age 18 or 21 to know the difference. But I also understand, from the DA perspective, it's like even if somebody doesn't understand the tools, it's a slippery slope because if other kids are being abused, you don't want them just going around murdering people. Like as terrible as people may be, murder is not a good thing no matter what. And so you want to believe in the system and you want to believe that people can reach out and they can do the due process. We've just seen so many times where it doesn't work out, and when you're in that moment of just like, I can't take it anymore, and you explode, you get it. Yeah, it's just such a final thing. And so and I guess everyone knows, even they know, it's like, yes, we did a horrible thing, we murdered our parents. And I think the hardest part of it too is like the Kitty Menendez of it all, right? Because Jose, it seems established, is this very abusive person. Where does Kitty lie in this? And I think that is where, as we watch the monsters, as we watch these documentaries, we are still trying to figure out, what role did she have in enabling her husband all of these years? We'll never know, right? She's dead. But the fact that her family members, other than her brother, who is very adamantly against the brothers being released, her family members seem to support the brother. So I think that says something.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. We're probably never going to fully understand the Kitty Menendez of it all. And at this point, has it been enough time that we have to just sort of accept that? And I think it's so telling that, it's like I believe it's her sister is very adamant about the release. And I don't think that I don't believe in things like the death penalty. That's just, where I personally stand. And I don't believe that it's okay to murder your parents. But I also believe that we have to have a criminal justice system that is fair. And we have far from that. And I think this case is an example of how unfair our criminal justice system has become, because should two abused boys be in prison without the possibility of parole for the rest of their lives for something they did when they were 18, 19 years old? Now, I don't believe in 2024, if this happened, that you would be sentenced that way. What do you think about that?
Well, I think this case would be handled completely different in this day and age because one, I think there would have been a belief the minute that they said they were being abused and they would have been more protected. There would not be, late night hosts making jokes about this. And I definitely don't think the trial would be televised because this is, sexual abuse we're talking about. So I don't think it would be handled the same way at all, for sure.
I feel like 7 to 10 years would have been acceptable and understandable because no, you don't kill your parents. That's not great. And it would have, from your point, sort of to the DA's point, shown like, no, you really can't do this. And here are the different things that are in place that can help you if you're being abused. I do think it would have been really hard for those brothers at that time because of the way that sexual abuse against boys is perceived by society. It would have been very hard for them to come forward. But like if they had done 7 to 10 years, I think they would have also gotten a lot of the help that they needed because from what we've learned, Erik and Lyle have been, quote unquote model individuals who have been incarcerated. Have you
Mhm.
read at all about some of like what they've been involved in? Do you know about that?
I don't know all the things, but I do know that the DA Garcon made a point in the press conference of pointing that out of like, a lot of inmates, we see go down this path, joining gangs, becoming more violent offenders, adding more time. And the brothers never did that. They were very much, like you said, model prisoners. I don't know all of the things they were involved in, but it seems like they were doing their best to make the best of a situation, which is why it's so interesting because when you talked about how this case is an example of how the system isn't fair, it's interesting too how it wasn't fair to them at that time because boys weren't believed as abuse. It's also interesting now because there is an element of like there are so many people who will never get this opportunity to get a resentencing, and we're looking at these two former rich Beverly Hill boys. It's 35 years later, but a lot of people won't get that opportunity. And are they getting this opportunity only because of who they are and the fact that Ryan Murphy saw this like, oh, this is the story I want to tell, and why is this the story you want to tell when there's so many other, it's interesting. And so I worry about them, of course, when they get out because we've seen what happens with Gypsy Rose, those sorts of things. It's
I did
I think they'll
see.
be more mature because they were more mature even going in, but
Yeah, and I think they've had a lot of time to like build a support system outside of the prison. I know I believe they're both married.
yes.
And that seems like they've developed like family units through that. I know one of them is the parent to a stepdaughter. I think that's Lyle. But yeah, like there is the element of privilege in this case, right? Like I mean there was something. First of all, they're both good looking boys, good looking men, so there's that sort of like is the sort of quote unquote pretty privilege a thing. Also they were incredibly wealthy, and I think that adds a level of fascination to their story. You add in the like fact that it's in Beverly Hills and it's got celebrities involved, etc. Yeah, and I guess my hope with this story is that we start thinking a little bit more about people who might also be experiencing a similar sentencing to the brothers, and perhaps those need to be revisited as well, but they might not be as wealthy or they might not be as hot. Listen, Erik was very hot in Monsters. Like
Yeah.
there's no arguing about it. But yeah, I'm talking about the actor. But Erik and
Yes.
Lyle, if you're listening, both good looking. Okay, don't worry. But yeah, I totally agree. And I think my thought is that I believe, just based on what I've been learning about Erik and Lyle and how they've grown during these last 30 some odd years, is that I think when they get out, if they get out, they will use their platform that way. And
Mhm.
I'm excited for that. So my next question for you is like, what comes next? Because, we have this press conference on, I think was it Thursday?
It was Thursday, yeah.
I got to tell you, I was glued to the phone. Right? Like bring back appointment TV. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that is when I'm like, when we're all watching the same thing. And last night with like the Dodgers game, it's like the same,
Oh god,
like we
so
want
amazing.
appointment TV again. We want
Yes.
live entertainment. So points to you, George Gascon, because I was into it. What happens next, Kiki? Because a lot of people are saying, oh, the Menendez brothers are being freed. I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
think that's what's happening.
That's definitely not what's happening at all. And, I get why they do these press conferences to generate that sort of buzz, because once that's in the TikTok world and people are running with all the disinformation, it just makes it easier for them. No, basically, two pieces of new evidence had already come up that the DA was reevaluating. Now, the reasons they were reevaluating are people questioning it. They're saying that they were already reevaluating it, but Gascon did make a point of saying that, this documentary came out and they started kind of got inundated in the office with a lot of requests that they couldn't keep up with. They didn't have the manpower. And there had been a hearing scheduled already for, I believe, November 29th. And they just he basically said they moved up this sort of decision because of the inundation of people who were just like, look at this, look at this. And they were like, okay, the only way we're going to do this if we do this press conference. There had been a press conference, I think a week or two prior where, a bunch of
Were you
family members
there?
came out. I had gone to that press conference. Yeah, I wanted to see it live. And, Kitty Menendez, her 92-year-old sister, is there speaking. After that press conference, Gascon said, I'm going to make a decision within 10 days about the resentencing, my suggestion, or if I have a suggestion. And he, beat that deadline. I imagine he came out on Thursday. This is just in my mind because we had the World Series game on. So much was happening on Friday in LA. I felt like he's like, I need to do Thursday so that it doesn't get overpowered by all these other things. And also maybe he didn't want to be in traffic. He's
You
like,
guys, you have no idea what happened. If you're not in LA last night, it was insane. We had every single thing that could have been happening in this city. It was happening. Kiki and I were both hunkered down like it was a hurricane.
went to the grocery store in person and everything. Yeah.
Yes.
So on Thursday, he basically said, okay, I've made a decision and I believe that the brothers should be resentenced. He said, I believe that the life without the possibility of parole should be removed. And I believe that my recommendation is that they be sentenced to murder. Now, murder carries 25 to life, but it was a double murder. So it would carry 50 to life. But he said, in the state of California, if you're under 26, basically they would be eligible for parole now because they were under the age of 26 at the time the crimes were committed. So if that resentencing happened, they could be basically released right away. I'm going to file that in court on Friday. So the next day, he's like, I'm going to file that in court on Friday. And then from there, it starts the ball rolling. They still have to have a hearing where the brothers either show up in person or probably via Zoom. People were arguing from the defense side. There will be arguments made, and then the judge will make a decision about whether he or she wants the resentencing to happen. This all comes down to the judge at the end of the day. Now, one point to make is Superior Court judges, just like the DA in California, are both elected. Everybody's elected. So people talk about whether they can be influenced by outside sources because they want to be elected. Possibly. They are not going to ever admit to that. But what we're saying is it's going to come down to this judge. And if this judge decides, no, these brothers need to be locked up for the rest of their life, that is the decision of the judge, and the DA can't do anything about it. Now, even if the DA isn't reelected, this process will still go forward regardless. So, I think that's a good thing. And the DA also made a point of saying at the press conference, many people in my office do not agree with my recommendation. They believe the brothers should be locked up. And many people in my office do believe that the boys were sexually abused and should be let out. And he said, and they will have the opportunity to argue that in court. So, I mean, there will be people, in the own office who will be arguing against, his recommendation. So we're still in the process. But once this goes in front of the judge, there is a chance the brothers could be out before the end of the year. But that's not absolute. The judge has to make this final decision.
Well, it's interesting because, as you said, these are elected officials. George Gascon is up for re-election, and it's a very intense re-election here in California. So I think that the timing of this is interesting, and it depends on how you feel about all of that. Is that okay that he is using this power perhaps to do something that he wants to do in, the last few months of his career? Or is he doing it to try to garner votes? Or is he just doing it because that's what he believes in? And I think the answer is actually all of these things. But I would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I always think it's funny if you watch the full press conference at the end, they always do a Q&A, and journalists basically just scream out answers, right? And you can't see the whole background of the room, so you just hear voices. And there was this one journalist who kept screaming out, DA Gascon, this is a re-election year, does your decision on this recommendation for recent, and the minute he would say re-election, everyone was like, stop interrupting. We're not answering any questions about re-election. This is about the Menendez resentencing. This isn't about the re-election. If you want to talk about re-election, catch me outside, basically. And he was like, but I'm asking. He's like, no, stop interrupting. He's like, but I'm asking a legitimate question. This is what people want to know. The fact that they kept shutting him down, I was like, man, can you just answer a little bit? I know you can't, but people do want to know. And I do, at the end of the day, I kept trying to think, is it a bad thing when people are influenced to be better in office by outside sources? Yes and no. I think that it can go really left, but it can also be very right. And so I never know where we lie on this. But he kept making a point. Gascon kept making a point of saying, we have resentenced, I believe it was like over 300 inmates in I don't even remember the time period he said, but he kept saying, we have resentenced 300 people. And he said I think he said only 4 of them have recommitted.
Yes, I remember. The number was yeah. And so I think that's a really important thing for people to remember, is that the point of our prison system is meant to be rehabilitation. And from the perspective of all these people who have been with Erik and Lyle, I've heard from